Thank you. We are now talking about semi-domesticated reindeer and not the wild ones.
Yeah, and we will focus on transport and slaughter and mainly talk about where are we now, what's going on, just to give you a picture of the current state. But we also want you to think ahead, what can be done differently, what can be done better in order to safeguard animal welfare. So where are we heading and why should we be heading there? Oops.
Yeah.
I did.
The population of the semi-domesticated reindeer are around 250,000, both in Sweden and Norway. And this morning I checked off for Finland, which is around 200,000.
Yep.
Sweden has no wild reindeer. Norway had 30,000. I reduced a little bit after yesterday's talk, so it's between 25,000 and 30,000. And in Finland, it's a growing population again of the wild forest reindeer, so it's estimated to be up to 2,000 individuals.
Yep. And we start with transport and discuss how this transport is different from transport of mainly domestic animals, because that's what we're used to transporting, right?
So these reindeer, they are kept outdoors the whole year, so they are not necessarily tame. Actually, the tameness has become less during the last, let us say, 50 years. And they are extremely dependent on their herd. Their flock instinct is very, very high. They are not familiar to any confinements, neither roof or fences or anything. But at the same time, many of them are transported quite often because due to infrastructure and these things, when they, in the old days, were moved by foot. Now many of them are transported back and from the winter and summer pastures. Yeah. The transport regulation is falling under the 2005 EU regulations. There are also some cross-border transport between Russia, Norway, Sweden, Finland. But there are also much of the transport that is not under the regulation because it's exemption for shorter transport below 50 kilometers.
Yes. And there can be national legislation for this, which will then be different between the different nations involved, just to make it more complicated.
So the reindeers are gathered and brought into vehicles that could be large lorries, they could be smaller trucks, even small trailers. And as we said, to pastures and to slaughter. Most of them are transported. And this could look like this. It's often more homemade solutions. In the bottom right here, it's the legs are tied up and they're put into a car. But you also see large vehicles, so it varies quite a lot.
Yeah, from very quite professional establishments with illumination, as you can see in the top right, and raceways designed for various types of lorries, to the very non-developed versions.
Yeah, yes. And some of the challenges here are that the vehicles and the ramps and also the fences are not well designed or even not maintained. So it's a risk for injuries. The animals are not always fit for transport. Much of the transportation is in winter, so it's maybe very slippery. That may also cause injuries. Sometimes of the year they have antlers, which also can cause injuries on the animal in front of the one with the antlers. And for the summer transportation, the antlers have this hide on, which is full of nerves and the blood supply, so it's painful to be handled by the horns, and the handler should be very careful.
So this is a seasonal thing, right? Where the velvet horns occur during some parts of the year, and then.
But also at slaughter in the autumn, the large antlers for the male animals can be so big, so it's a problem, and they need to be transported separately. Or they have to take the horns off, which they often use a saw, and just saw them off.
And the fact that not all animals are fit for transport is mainly related to the fact that they're only semi-domesticated and not that tame. It's really difficult to inspect them prior to transport to make sure whether they are fit for transport or not. Yep.
So this is a picture of how a fence system could be in the middle here. So the animals are brought into one bigger enclosures, and then smaller group into smaller and smaller enclosures, until the smallest pen here, which is a picture on the left-hand side, which is quite small, maybe just 20 meters in diameter. And this will give the circling behavior of the animals. Most of them are circling towards left.
They keep running.
And then the people just are standing in the middle and grabbing them by the antlers. In the old days, they used larger enclosures and often a lasso, but this has been shown to be very stressful, and it's not often used anymore. It is used, but not that often. Yeah, we talked about the fence facilities. It's very important that the design is properly to get this circling behavior. And if you don't get that, they will start climbing the fences, and they can panic.
Yeah. And really injure themselves and each other.
So often they are used quite solid fences or wildlife fences like we have on the roads, and often it's covered with a net inside.
Or a tarpaulin or something.
Yep.
Yep. Yes, and then for slaughter then, once they get to the slaughterhouse, not all reindeer will actually end up at a slaughterhouse. Those that are slaughtered for household consumption are usually slaughtered in the field, and of course without a veterinarian or anything, it's just for the family consumption. But if it's to be sold to the public or to other families, actually formerly at least, they have to be brought to a slaughterhouse, and there are two versions of this. There are temporary slaughterhouses or mobile slaughterhouses. We used to have them in both Sweden and Norway. Nowadays it's mainly Norway. In Sweden we have a trend to more stationary slaughterhouses, which means that the reindeer are transported there or driven by foot, actually, or driven on foot, but more stationary slaughterhouses, whereas in Norway there's still a number of temporary mobile slaughterhouses for reindeer. We should also bear in mind that slaughter of reindeer is a seasonal thing. It's not like your average cattle or pig slaughterhouse with a daily activity. It is restricted to some seasons, and usually not even every day then, because it depends on the weather, if the weather is good for herding up the reindeer or not. Otherwise you have to wait. So it's a slightly unpredictable activity that way. It's difficult to plan. When it comes to rules and regulations, reindeer is a food-producing animal, so even if they're just semi-domesticated, which can be discussed, but that's how they are usually treated. But they are under human control, and they fall under 1099. They're not considered wildlife when it comes to animal welfare. Then they are considered a domestic species. But there are no detailed provisions that are specific for reindeer in 1099 in the EU regulation. So it falls under the general point of stunning and handling, avoiding pain and distress, of course, but no detailed regulation specific for reindeer in the EU legislation. However, there's national legislation in Sweden and Norway and other countries as well, but it may differ then between the different countries. For example, in Sweden, reindeer has to be slaughtered, being stunned with mechanical stunning only. Rifle is possible, but virtually at slaughterhouses they always use captive bolt guns, like the one on top there, or another design. Whereas in Norway, a bowed knife a klumpkniv, is allowed for household slaughter by the Sami people. It has to be a long-bowed knife then to reach the cerebellum. This method is under debate, and that's why it's been banned in Sweden for decades, but still legal in Norway, which makes it complicated for people who actually live on both sides of the border. But that's the way it is. And there is sort of a lack of documentation of how efficient it is for stunning. It will paralyze them, but whether it actually gives a proper stun or not is debated.
Yeah, there are some documentation, but not sufficient to fulfill the standards we have today. But they have looked into some of the heads, and the knife actually reaches through the cerebellum and into the main brain, and it gives quite a lot of hemorrhages. But the documentation is done on very few animals.
Yeah. And in any case, regardless of that method, reindeer are normally bled by chest stick, just like cattle. And looking at so what I said, in Sweden, in Norway there's both stationary and mobile units. In Sweden it's stationary slaughterhouses. And some slaughterhouses are really far away from everything, and this makes it complicated for the authorities as well with animal welfare inspections, because if they don't know until the night before or even the same day that they're going to slaughter, then you need to send a veterinary inspector out there. And so there are some complications related to animal welfare inspections in this case. So it's slightly unpredictable. Okay, animal welfare issues then in relation to slaughter. The reindeer, as you may have understood, may arrive at the slaughterhouse sort of at any time of day or night, depending on when you manage to gather them. A lot of these decisions can't be made beforehand, so often they arrive late at night or early in the morning. If it's during the winter half of the year, it's usually dark. I mean, this is far up north. Depending on how well situated and designed the slaughterhouse is, there can be more or less illumination. If there's light or not, there's nobody there from the slaughterhouse. Somebody has to unload the reindeer and let them in and make sure that they have water access, etc. But these people are not employed, that deliver, of course, the reindeer. They're not employed by the slaughterhouse. And there is no employee there in the night. Maybe the animals they're usually not that tame. They may be stressed after transport, depending on transport conditions. Some of them are in poor conditions. There have been problems with undernutrition in reindeer seasonally partly because of climate change, most likely, where it's icy and not snowy, and they can't reach the feed properly, because these animals are supposed to fend for themselves. So some of them are really in a poor condition, which is hard to tell from a distance. And you don't normally touch these animals as an owner. Some of them may have injured themselves during transport, etc., and nobody finds out when they arrive at the slaughterhouse. So it's difficult to inspect them. It's sometimes difficult to know whether they should receive feed or not, if they're used to sort of human-made food or not, and that can cause a problem. Also, handling before slaughter is an issue, because if the transporter or the owner brings the reindeer in, they don't have the certificate of competence that is required by 1099, which is really a requirement if you're handling animals in a slaughterhouse. So this is a grey zone where the authorities are a bit confused. And even if everybody's doing it correctly, there's no bad intentions here. There's still, from a legislational point of view, this can cause some problems. So this is something to look into. How can this be improved? And the transition from the owner or the transporter to the slaughterhouse needs to be worked on. And also the design of the raceways at the slaughterhouse. Sometimes there is room for improvement, and just as Cecilie said, they should always be handled in group. They're strict group living animals, and they get very stressed out if you try to single one out. Some examples from Larich at slaughterhouses, where large enclosures are built, ramp fitting the lorry that usually delivers the reindeer, and this is a good construction, but it doesn't always look like this. And you said there's fenced-in areas with a tarp around it to prevent the reindeer from trying to run away, and keeping them in a group with conspecifics. And in some slaughterhouses, I've seen that they use stationary reindeer, one that actually lives there in the enclosures all the time, to make the others feel at home. That's also something that can be discussed from a legislational point of view, but I've seen it happening.
Yeah, this is from a mountain facility. It's stationary, but used only a few weeks every year. So the animals are restrained manually and shot by a captive bolt, then hung up, shackled, and given the chest stick. And on the right hand here, you see how open it is. There are no walls. The heads and the antlers are thrown in a
in a heap.
In a heap on the side there. But it's cold weather and no flies, so it's...
From a hygiene point of view,
they are hanging there for some hours to cool down and then moved into a truck with cooling facilities.
And then we're going to give an example from a Norwegian study carried out a couple of years ago.
Yes. So I contacted the veterinarians which had supervision with 20 approved facilities. Some of them are very small. One of them are actually slaughtering 1/3 of the population, so it's a very big variation. So most of the reindeer, they are herded by helicopter. Only one plant that said that none of the animals are herded by helicopter.
And this is different in Norway from Sweden, for example, because there's different legislation on that.
Yeah, Sweden has a more detailed legislation on when it's allowed to use the helicopter, according to snow conditions and such on. Most reindeer are transported by a vehicle to the facility, but some are moved by foot, like the one I showed pictures from, then they are moved by foot. Transportation time is from 20 minutes to 8 hours. And as I said, large antlers are often removed before transport. And the lairage is only outdoors. And the stunning is considered very efficient, except there's a challenge with the antlers that could cover the site for the captive bolts. So then they had to use a pole position back here, or even shoot them from the side out in the lairage. But that's very seldom. The veterinarian said that they see more injuries than in other species, that it's mainly bruises and subcutaneous bleedings, often stemming from animals lying down on the transport and others trampling on it.
So these are transport-related injuries. These are not from outdoors before transport. These are occurring during transport too.
There are also some lameness and fractures. Not often, but it happens. They see stress-related diarrhea and ulcerations due to the stress. And there's also been a problem with low nutritional state for many animals. So they are like this on the left side there. They are totally emaciated. And then they are destroyed. Which also checked the cortisol levels in reindeer calves, and it's high. The basal level is supposed to be around below 25 nanomole per liter, and we found quite high levels, showing that this is stressful.
And both in the field and at the stationary slaughterhouses, and actually higher in the field, probably because they were not waiting between herding and slaughter.
Yeah, they were herded into the slaughterhouse the same day as they were slaughtered. While those at the stationary abattoir, they were transported in the day before, so they had rest before slaughter. And stress and exhaustion, they may result in poor meat quality and reduced shelf life, and can also cause unwanted stress taste of the meat.
So now you got a short introduction to the problem that can occur during reindeer slaughter, some issues, and there is a lot of research that remains to be done, I would say, when it comes to improving transport and slaughter for reindeer, whereas the actual slaughter is not the problem, it's the handling around it, I would say. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and excuse me for losing my mind in the beginning of this. Is there any question?
Susanna Ahlström, Finnish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. I'm curious about as you mentioned in your presentation, that reindeer is a very sort of herd-dependent animal, and about the stunning, how the stunning is performed. Are the other still alive, or herd members, or are the reindeers present or near the animal?
Well, there are different versions, but I've seen them stunning them like bringing them 2 by 2 or 3 by 3 into the stunning pen, and then just rapidly stunning them immediately after each other to avoid singling one reindeer out. But I'm sure this is different at different reindeer slaughterhouses. I do not know the statistics.
And you don't think that's a problem with the regulation 1099?
If that is actually legal to do it that way, if they're properly restrained still can be manual restraint, as long as they are not stunned and bled by the same person. That's where the legislation, at least in Sweden, says that you need to, if stunning and I think it's 1099 as well, stunning and sticking is carried out by the same person, you have to do one animal and then the next one, stun, stick, instead of stun, stun, stun. But if there are 2 people involved, that is quite all right with the legislation. And it's not illegal for one animal to see another animal being stunned. And it actually doesn't stress them much. There is research on that, not on reindeer and cattle. So I'd say for reindeer, it's preferred to be in a group until they actually are stunned, if that can be handled in a way that still limits stun-to-stick interval to the necessary short span.
Thank you.
Okay, one more question, Birgitta here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Birgitta Stav Larsson from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Swedish Center for Animal Welfare. You mentioned DFD meat, and do you have any figures from your investigation about how common it is with the DFD meat?
No, because this was a smaller survey, so we can't use that for. But some of them had. Yeah. But it's not any valid fundament for statistics, so I don't know. So usually they are rested at the slaughterhouse overnight, or at least for some hours, to reduce the problem.
Okay, yeah, because that would otherwise be a very good incentive for them to increase the animal welfare. I think.
But it also depends on the nutritional state. Before and many other factors.
Yeah. Thank you.